Welcome to my Shiro guide. This is a hopefully a full guide of Shiro as a character and how she functions in basically any comp. We'll talk about quite literally everything. So I'll start with just with Shiro as a character, right? So Shiro is a pretty interesting character in a sense that you can basically use her in any comp. So if you're Vault and you're using King at the moment, which I think most people are, maybe with Samir Nemesis King, you can substitute King for Shiro, and you'll basically get like 700 crit stat if, well, 664. And that's pretty valuable when you think about the fact that like 1,000 crit is about 6% value. So I would definitely consider that, not just from the stat alone, but how reliable she is at shattering and how reliable she is at buffing herself and her teammates. So physical is a pretty unique element in a sense that if you ever have a physical unit in a team comp in your party, you'll benefit from it no matter what. With this grievous effect, which is basically when you're using any physical weapon and you have full charge, the next attack you do or skill basically triggers the grievous effect, which makes the target takes 20% more damage from any sources for 7 seconds. So it's you're kind of like buffing everybody, except everybody has to hit the target that you hit with the grievous effect. So I think from that alone, it's pretty clear that it's such an insane buff with essentially nothing at cost. So you can use her as a main DPS in physical comp, as you see. I'm using her as my main DPS. If you're using Shiro as a main DPS, you basically want a third unit to boost your stat. So at this point, I use Huma because that's my only C6 or like fairly high start units. I value the attack and resistance and HP, although it doesn't really matter. If my Crow or if I have a Samir that's like C5, C3, maybe C5, C4, I would probably use Samir instead. And the problem is at the moment for me is because I have two, I would say, bruiser melee units that don't give crit. So as you can see, Shiro has crit, Claudia doesn't have crit, Huma doesn't have crit. So I'm missing about like probably about 1,200 or 1,400 crit off the bat. So that's pretty bad. And ultimately, you want something like a Samir or a Subasa or a Nemesis, and it doesn't really matter because you don't really switch to them. You're just basically playing, ping pong with Shiro and Claudia. That's for DPS. If you're playing a healer, you can basically play her with quite literally anything, right? So it could be Coco and Nemesis and Shiro. So whatever it is that whatever support setup that you have, it's completely fine. Now, coming back to the advancements again, as DPS, it's pretty like clear because everything that you do, everything that you have is just for you. In a sense that the C3, you can basically use skill without shield coming up because when shield comes up, you'll probably shatter anyway most of the time if you play it right. So C3 has a shadow reset, but for support, you actually want to save this most of the time. You want to save this because the role of skill, right, of full bloom, it's actually a buffing effect. So if we look at full bloom buff at C1, it says increased damage dealt to and all elemental shattering effects on targets within full bloom's range by 30%. What that means is that if I was to cast skill, this is full bloom, and basically, if you hit anything in this circle, your damage is amplified by 30%. That's similar to what this is, which is Space-Time Rift. Except it's, smaller in range and probably shorter duration. Now, you can stack Full Bloom with Space-Time Rift, and you basically have 50% damage dealt to everybody. Full Bloom is not just it doesn't just affect you; it affects everybody as well. So it's a pretty crazy buff when you think about it. So as support, you basically want to make sure that you're using this in the time where you need it the most, right? So I would think about, it's kind of hard, I guess, because if you're not in Discord, if you're not like communicating, you don't know. But I would say after you shatter, you definitely want to use this along with Space-Time Rift to maximize your damage output. So other than that, the C4 is an okay buff. It doesn't really matter. So if you can't realistically get this C5, I would just stay at C3. But C5 is pretty amazing buff because she makes Grievous to be double duration. So it becomes another 7 seconds, so that's 14 seconds. And if you play with a Claudia, or if you play it right, if you try to charge with like a different weapon, and then you come back to Shiro when you're close to like full charge, you basically have like full perma Grievous, right? So continuous 20% extra damage, which is really insane. So this is great. So if you're playing support, you can sit up to C5. You don't have to worry about C6. If you play DPS, definitely go for C6. C6 is by far the biggest difference in physical. Physical cannot function without Shiro C6. It does not matter if you have Claudia C6. It does not matter. So this is by far the biggest difference in Bygone and anything. So I hope that makes sense from the advancements. So combos with Shiro is pretty easy. What you want to do is mainly to get charges, or as your main DPS attacks is pretty much left click and then left click and hold. So it looks like this. As you can see, she spams the 5 chakrams and it does pretty good damage, actually. The only gripes that I have about it is that it has different crit hit, so you can possibly crit once and not critting for the other 4. But if you have high crit, you obviously crit a lot more and your damage is more. So the thing with this attack is it can be a bit tricky. My biggest advice for this, if you want to get the timing right, is to make sure that you start left clicking again once you see her chakram sitting behind her back. So just now, her chakram is right in behind her back. That's when you want to start clicking again. Otherwise, you kind of get into this animation where she just stop attacking. I just did that there. I don't know if you hear my mouse click or not, but basically you have to wait for the chakram to be behind her back and then you can attack again. That's kind of a gap, I would say. Or what you can do is to kind of just keep spam clicking, I would say. That works as well. If my mic caught any of that, then you would have heard me spam clicking my left click after I'm holding it. So but that's pretty much the bread and butter, um, you know, DPS for Shiro. Now, if I'm to show the full rotation, it would be Claudia discharge into skill, or what you can do, you can also open with these two relics here to maximize the damage. You can space time rift and then Coent and then Claudia discharge into Claudia skill, go into Shiro, and if you want to be fancy, you can cancel her discharge if you happen to have double discharge. You can cancel Shiro's discharge by jumping during the animation. And the reason why that's better is, well, you kind of save time. So, and then after that, you just use Shiro skill, you dash attack 3 times. During skill, you really need to dash attack because of the way her skill works. So, in the tooltip, it says split chakrams triggered by waning moon will also bounce up to 5 times. Now, waning moon is pretty much this. It's the dodge attack. It is not what is it? It's not scatter. So scatter, which is what we just did, the left click and then left click hold, it does not bounce in full bloom, which is a shame, obviously, because otherwise you can probably throw like more chakrams. So you have to rely on dodge for skill, which is my biggest advice, to make sure that you're not actually wasting dodges before you're about to use the skill. So you want to dodge attack 3 times as fast as possible, and then you go back to scatter until you recover another dodge bar. I think most of the time you only get 4 dodges, so 3 dodges, and then you just wait for the fourth dodge. So yeah, that's probably about it. So this is how it looks. There you go. So as you can see, I didn't get the 5th dodge there. It was 4 dodges, and you can see me bypassing the Shiro discharge altogether, because I think if I didn't bypass the Shiro discharge by jumping, by canceling the animation altogether, I probably wouldn't be able to get the 4th dodge. So that's really, really, really crucial. Yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. You don't want to use Claudia. You can use Claudia to get charges, but when you do that, you have to think about what matrices you're using on Claudia. And generally she deals like less damage than Shiro in terms of the waning moon. Like that's more damage than what Claudia does. So I actually just want to check real quick. No, it's not waning moon. Sorry, it's in terms of scatter. So scatter does more damage than Claudia auto attack, and Claudia doesn't really have any like special moves or move set to deal constant DPS better than Shiro. So I would definitely just do scatter most of the time, and that's it really. It's pretty simple. You just have to get used to canceling discharge on Shiro by jumping. The reason why I say cancel discharge on Shiro is because when you're in, maybe in Bygone it's okay, but then again I still think that you're wasting time because the stun is just for 1 second. So it's a really lousy effect, and the multiplayer is also really bad. I would just not like recommend this at all. This is just a waste of time. It's probably one of the worst discharge in the game. So I would just jump, or not use but well, basically you shouldn't have to discharge at any time. You should just, like, the moment you have discharge, just go on Claudia, and just do that and skill. So hopefully that makes sense, and that's it for the combo part. So regarding matrices, I just want to point out the fact that two-piece Huma is not necessarily as good as you think it is. The reason is because firstly, it only procs on dodge attacks. It says dodge skills here, but it's basically dodge attacks. And secondly, well, even about that alone, Shiro doesn't have any way to recover her dodges other than natural regen. And secondly, unlike Frigg, she doesn't actually have unlimited dodges. And I think in the grand scheme of things, when you're playing Shiro as a damage dealer, you will most likely proc aggro because Shiro does a lot of damage with scatter. And when that happens, you have to save dodges for either preparation for skill or proccing Fantasia or dodging actual skill shots. Now, if you're continually using dodges, right, even if you're spacing it out with scatter, in my opinion, you're still basically wasting dodges for damage that's pretty minuscule because we're talking about 15% attack. And keep in mind that as physical comp, all your buffs are basically in a form of damage boost and not attack boost. So unlike Frost or Frigg, Frigg has domain which boosts attack I think up to 40%, which is why Huma Matrix is usually used by Frigg. Now, in my opinion, these factors are pretty consistent as to why it's problematic. So, the multiplier is really low, it's 15%. Even at C3, when you compare it to Shiro, Shiro's already at 22.6% damage. And, this is 26% of attack. So even with the arrival of Lin, eventually, if we do get the 15% extra resonance, you're still not having enough stats, basically. So I don't like this. I think that, you're free to use it if you want. I just think that Shiro, from numbers alone, from, consistency alone, would be better. And I just want to open it here. So what I'm using is basically two-piece Shiro and two-piece Crow. Firstly, regarding Shiro Matrix, people talk about the fact that it's only usable on the first 50%. But as you can see, the value is really high. So at C0, it's at 15%. It goes all the way up to 26%. Now, this is damage boost, keep in mind, and shatter boost. Okay, so the damage boost, it will apply to your shatter damage, and the shatter part will basically refer to your shatter stat, which is the flat value on Shiro is 13. So at C3, she has 26% more. 26% of 13, whatever it is, right? Or 126% times 13. That's really good value. And the reason why it's good for the first 50% is not only it speeds up the arrival of Pro Matrix effect, which is insanely strong, because at C6 you're gonna have 100% crit, and so you get to use basically this matrix to its fullest potential. And even at 59.9% to 49.9% HP, all of these matrices gonna come into play together, which I think is probably gonna be the pinnacle of Shiro damage. So, do I recommend Samir? I do. If you're using Shiro as a buffer or as a shatterer, you definitely want Samir instead of Shiro. Actually, instead of Crow, because you don't need to crit to do shatter. All you have to care about is just basically the shatter, right? Because damage percentage helps with shatter damage. Crit damage doesn't matter about shatter, so just keep that in mind. And yeah, I think that's it. It's pretty simple. If you're playing Shiro in Bygone, you can use Sawback 3 piece. Sawback 3 piece is actually better than all these that I have. Even minus the crow, I would say. So, but Sawback 3 piece is really consistent. It's 27%. If you're versing, you know, three targets. If you have four, well, it's stacked up to 27% anyway. So that's still decent. So you can have a 3 piece Sawback 2 star with one SSR, to complete the set. So yeah, and that's still really good. Even maybe not necessarily for shatter for bosses, because obviously it requires like multiple enemies to have like maximum value of it. But yeah, I wouldn't consider King Matrix for Shiro, and the reason being is because actually 8% when you shatter a target is actually a really really bad value. This contributes nothing to shatter capability. So yeah, if you want to use zero, you can, because at 4 piece you actually give 16% damage to your teammates, which is not bad. And if you're playing as a support, 4 piece zero is actually really good because you're most likely not going to get aggro, and you can basically use, because the 2 piece gives you the buff, the shield, when you have discharge, right? So if you're using Coco or Nemesis, you get charges. You use discharge on Shiro, and you get 16% more damage for 6 seconds. So the more often you can do this, like the better. Obviously, this is really 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 strong. Combining with the skill, it's gonna be even stronger. So yeah, that's probably the little curveball that I throw there. But yeah, that's pretty much it for my guide. Hopefully you guys are happy with that. Hopefully it's useful. And if you have any questions, feel free to write it down. Let me know. Thank you.